2 weeks after the last village council, as the market woke to the smell of rain on zinc roofs and hot akara sizzling, Tari's hands still trembled when she counted what the people owed, and what they could still owe the future if they did not act. The afternoon sun dripped like honey on the glass towers across the river, while the sound of danfo horns pressed in from the bus park, reminding everyone that wealth lived in many rooms, not only behind the council doors. She gathered the neighborhood in the square, inviting mothers with small babies, old men with missing teeth, and the taller child from the street who knew every trick of the seller's bark and every lie the landlord told. At the back, the new choir boys tuned their voices and someone strummed a worn guitar, the notes trembling between the cries of market sellers and the rhythm of rain tapping on iron roofs. She faced the crowd with the quiet courage that had carried her through long nights when the generator wheezed and stars looked in through the single window of her mother's shop. "We cannot borrow from the future," she said, "not when our children have already borrowed trouble for years." Then a tall figure stepped into the light, the town's eyes lifting in unison, and the hush went to a murmur as if a tent flap had opened to reveal a hidden room. This was not the usual guest from the charity office, not the lawyer with a friendly smile who wore his suit like a second skin. It was a man who wore neither suit nor smile, but carried an aura of quiet resolve, a man whose presence made the children forget the hunger in their stomachs and the fatigue in their legs. He spoke in measured tones that sounded like rain on a tin roof. "People of Kijani Quarter, I am not here to pretend I do not hear you. I am here to tell you the truth you deserve and to tell you who I am, because sometimes truth travels a road you did not expect." No one moved at first. Then a voice, shy and brave, asked, "Who are you?" And the man lifted his hands, not in surrender but in an invitation. "I am the founder of Zenith Global, a company that sits high on the world of money and numbers, but tonight I am your neighbor, a witness to a city that deserves justice more than pity." The crowd gasped, but Tari saw through the surprise a glimmer of what she had hoped for, the money, the power, the hush of the boardroom. All of it would be measured against the truth of people's lives. The man continued, "For years I funded a clinic, textbooks, and a small scholarship under the name of a woman who believed every child deserved a chance. And I did so not to be seen but to be useful. Today I name that fund, and I name myself, because stories of exploitation end when those who hoard power choose to use their power for good." The phrase felt like a drumbeat in Tari's chest, a rhythm that promised more than relief. It promised accountability. The room rippled with murmurs. A group of elders leaned forward, and some of the younger ones whispered, "So this is the big owner behind the smiling donor in the ads?" A man with a shaved head and a scar across his lip, who had walked past Tari at the market every morning for months, spoke up, his voice rough but clear. "If you are who you say, then show us the ledger, show the receipts, show the people you helped." The billionaire, or the man who knew he was a billionaire in hiding, nodded, his eyes not cold but tired. "I will show you everything you need. Not everything I have." That small denial hung in the air, a seed of doubt that Tari would carry with her like a seed in a shopping bag, ready to sprout if the rains did not come. The interval beat landed like a drumbeat in Tari's ear, the moment of the twist where wealth and truth clash. And as if the town had breathed out, a councilwoman's hands trembled, and she whispered to Tari, "You asked for justice. You asked for a fair share of the light. Now it's time to brand a path." The turning point came not from a loud confrontation, but from a quiet discovery. Beneath the stage panel in the hall's back room, someone found a battered envelope, sealed with wax and worn thread, containing a ledger with names, dates, and sums, a map of who paid what to whom, a list that tied the clinic's modest beginnings to a series of shell companies tucked away behind a dozen offices in a city far away. The ledger bore a name Tari did not expect, a name that belonged to the man who wore the mask of a neighbor, The man who had championed the neighborhood with a smile and a handshake, who had attended the school openings and the clinic nights, who had always asked the children about their dreams and never asked about their wallets. The crowd's whisper became a chorus of astonishment. Tari's heart skipped, then steadied, as she realized that this was not an accusation to cast a man out, but a key to unlock a larger door. The hidden billionaire was not someone from outside, but the very person everyone had trusted to keep the town afloat by paying the bills that their salaries never could cover. She looked at the man, and he looked back with something vulnerable in his gaze, a confession hidden in plain sight. The words finally broke free. "It is true that I have taken care of you. I have sheltered your pain. I have built a world where your children can read and learn." He paused, and the room fell silent. "But I have also not told you everything, because I believed that the moment you asked for your rights, you would take the path of justice with your own hands." Then his voice softened, and he added, "I am not a saint. I am a man who loves your city enough to risk my fortune to protect it, but I will not hide again." A new sense of balance emerged as Tari stepped forward with her best friend, Kai, who was a year younger but wiser in the ways of truth. They had long argued about the difference between helping and controlling, between giving a hand up and pulling someone into the gutter. Now they could see how the road could bend into a bridge if the right people stood on the same plank. The immense mercy of the billionaire's reveal came with a hard price. The boardroom hush that had protected him would now become a courtroom breeze, the kind that exposed misdeeds to the sun. The digital screens around the hall flickered as a video feed from a distant office popped up, showing a secretary who had kept her mouth shut for too long, then whispered a name, then paused, then spoke again with the courage Tari felt in her own chest. The company knew about the evictions, the inflated rents, the loans that never ended. They knew and did not stop it. The crowd swelled with a mix of anger and relief, a strange alchemy where fear and gratitude brewed together. And Tari's moth, who had not smiled in many months, stepped closer to her daughter and whispered, "This is bigger than us. It will hurt some families to heal others, but if we don't take the risk, the village will lose its soul." The billionaire, hearing this, acknowledged the truth with a gentle nod. "We will not pretend that the hurt was easy to bear. We will use the power of money to repair it. But we must do it with the people's voices, not over them." The plan began to crystallize. A public apology, a transparent audit, a social fund that would reinvest in the very communities that the misdeeds had harmed, a formal scholarship program that would train teachers, doctors, and engineers who would stay in the neighborhood and not abandon hope the moment a bigger opportunity came. In the days that followed, Tari, Kai, and a dozen other youth volunteers worked alongside elders to draft a charter for a new foundation, the Mountain Gate Fund, named for the hill that overlooked the town, and taught everyone to look beyond the immediate glare of wealth toward a horizon where justice could be measured in lives changed, not numbers moved on a spreadsheet. The interval beats' sting softened into a steady rhythm as they held town hall meetings beneath the market's awning, the rain dripping from the leaves making a soft patter on the metal roofs, and a generator's hum adding a steady bass line to the voices of the people. "We want jobs and schools," cried a grandmother with bright beads, "not promises that vanish in wind." The hidden billionaire's presence, no longer hidden in the shadows of a confidential charity page, became a living part of the town's story. He arrived at a youth science fair wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, not a suit, to explain the foundation's first grant, a micro-loan program for artisans, a digital literacy class at the community center, and a small clinic expansion, funded by a grant that would be matched by the company's philanthropic tax. The community watched in awe as the foundation's first beneficiaries stepped forward. A girl with bright eyes who opened a book about stars and declared she would become an astronaut. A boy whose mother had sold porridge in the square who announced he would study to become an engineer and fix the water pipes. a grandmother who spoke of a school where she had learned to read and now wanted to teach others to count. The billionaire, listening to these dreams, turned to Tari and said, "This is the mercy I hoped to see when I chose to walk among you, not as a donor, but as a neighbor." "Then you will stay," Tari replied. "Not as a distant benefactor, but as a partner who answers when the streetlight goes out." He smiled, and the look in his eyes betrayed both relief and caution. He understood that power travels with two hands, one to give, one to listen, and that the second is harder to keep steady. Yet the road ahead was not easy. A storm of legal paperwork, community questions, and old grievances swirled like dust in the square, and those who had once benefited from the old system believed the change would erase them, or erase their chance to profit again. They whispered about a court case, about a sale that would push families from their homes, about the risk of a new mall financed by the same river of money that had once saved the clinic. The billionaire's name had become both shield and target, a beacon and a target in the gossip. The town's kids were the true critics of the old ways, and they proved their wisdom when they coaxed the old vendor who sold palm wine into testifying with a smile in his voice. They coaxed a shy clerk who had kept the contracts safe to reveal the red flags in the documents, and they coaxed Tari's mother to tell the truth about how the rents had gone up and how families had to borrow from moneylenders with the threat of eviction looming like a sword above their heads. The new plan required a spectrum of courage, to face the fear of losing support from the powerful, to risk the comfort of predictable payoffs for the chance to build something lasting, to allow the future to be created by the voices of children rather than the whispers of men who counted money in private rooms. The private rooms now were filled with the same voices, the same young eyes, but they carried a sharper note, the note of accountability. The billionaire, who had often looked at the world as a ledger of assets and liabilities, began to learn a second language, the language of trust, of listening without defense, of admitting when one is wrong and then fighting to repair it with transparent acts. And through all the complexity, Tari found a simple thread tying everything together: kindness rewarded, justice served, and a new balance created by the community's own hands, with a billionaire not as master, but as partner. There were moments when a small child would run up to him with a drawing of the clinic and say, "Thank you for helping us learn." He would kneel and respond, "Thank you for teaching me to listen." The moment of payoff came when the town learned that the evictions would stop, that a fair set of rules would govern future rent increases, and that the clinic expansion would proceed on schedule. The old landlord who had pushed the families into the corner faced a final hearing where a judge, brought in by the foundation and the community, ordered the settlement terms to be posted publicly and a formal apology to be read aloud in the town square. The moment stretched into a wave of relief that moved from the stage to the street. The priest, who had pressed his hands to his heart at the first protest, joined the children who had kept the vigil outside the clinic. The market women who sold their goods with a new sense of safety clapped and cried, then laughed, then prepared to share tea and porridge with their neighbors in a sign that the town could, at last, begin again. In the end, the matter did not end with a resignation from power, but with a transfer of responsibility. The billionaire's funds would continue to work, but the people would own the story and the outcomes. A board of neighborhood representatives sat as co-owners of the fund, and Tari was chosen to serve as a youth ambassador who would carry the message of fairness beyond Kijani Quarter. The last beat of the chapter landed not with a fanfare, but with a quiet pulse. A letter posted on the community bulletin board, signed by the named donors and the mayor, stating that the foundations existed to empower families to stay in their homes, to give their children a chance to learn, to build new businesses that would employ the neighbors, and to prevent the hunger that roads and markets and schools could never cure alone. The paragraph ended with a promise that the next 9 months would bring the first concrete results, the first set of scholarships sent to 3 high schools, the renovation of the clinic's waiting room, and a small plant that would soothe the town's water problem, a symbol of how far they had come and how far they might go. But even as the crowd dispersed toward the riverbank where the mango trees stood, and the old men told stories to the younger ones about the long road ahead, Tari felt the weight of one last thread remaining loose, the identity of the man who had walked these streets in the clothes of a neighbor and who had hidden behind the mask of donor and philanthropist. She could not shake the sense that something about his motive still needed to be tested by time, that the balance between gratitude and guardrails would be tested again when the next effort to widen the roads came or when a new investor with a different appetite arrived. She turned to him, and in the half-light his smile softened into something more open, almost a confession, and he spoke softly. "If you are wondering what I want in return, the answer is this. I want the town to want this future for itself. I want the money to be a tool, not a curtain. I want the children who sit here to grow taller than my fear." Tari nodded, and the streetlight flickered, a brief pause before the next act began. In the hush that followed, one more truth surfaced from a hidden corner of the crowd. A young woman, who had once been a clerk in a faraway city, whispered to Tari that the Foundation's records would reveal one more piece of the puzzle, that a hidden agreement existed between two parties if the town chose to press it, and that if the truth came to light, it would not crush them, but free them to write their own future with the tools they had earned. Tari smiled, not with triumph, but with a calm determination. She would watch, she would question, she would wait for the next interval beat that would bring the final piece into place. For now, the bridge stood, the river would bear their laughter, and the town would begin again with a faith that kindness could be rewarded, and that justice would endure, even when the light in the mayor's office flickered and someone whispered about power and pride. And she knew that the story of this place, this village of zinc roofs and danfo horns, of rain tapping on metal, of a hidden billionaire who learned to listen, would continue to teach the world that mercy without accountability is a shadow. But mercy with accountability becomes a beacon that guides a community from fear to freedom. And as the last souls drifted home under a sky turning from slate to ember, Tari felt in her bones that the interval had only opened a doorway, not closed a door, and that the next morning would bring two chances, to heal or to hold, and to decide which one the town would choose to become. The morning after the interval beat found Tari standing at the edge of the square where the rain had washed the dust from the market sticks, and the first traders unfurled their awnings. And she felt the new weight of two chances pressing down with the same quiet insistence as the river that ran along the town's edge. A nurse from the clinic hurried past with a cloth over her shoulder and whispered that the 9-month pledge was already being written into the town's days, and Tari's first breath carried a question she would not let go. Would the town choose to heal without becoming dependent? Or would the shadow of money still loom over every simple promise? Kai walked beside her, shoulders squared, and in his pocket his phone flashed with a note from a courier who had promised to meet at the old mango tree with something that could not be spoken aloud in the hall. They moved toward the plaza where the elders had begun to set up a portable stage, a banner still damp from yesterday's rain, and a murmur rose from the crowd like wind through leaves. Someone had said the ledger's last page was being copied again. Someone else whispered that the secret partner's name would finally be spoken aloud, and Tari felt the old fear loosen its grip enough to let a small flame of resolve burn brighter. The dawn brought a public invitation, a town hall to hear the Foundation's quarterly report, a chance to hear the true costs of mercy, a chance to see two hands holding a single scale, one side the people, the other the donor-turned-neighbor. And the questions came fast. If the evictions stop, what happens to the families who depended on the rents to stretch their days? If the Foundation funds sweep in, who keeps the promises when the next market slump hit? And who finally owns the ledger that bound the town to a distant city's rules? Tari's mother, who had learned to count not just coin, But the faces of the families who dined or cried behind closed doors joined Tari by the stage and pressed a hand to Tari's sleeve, saying softly, "Justice comes in daylight, child. We must keep our eyes open when the light shifts." Then, as if the light itself were a signal, a courier arrived with a small envelope sealed with wax and a thread of blue. Tari broke the seal and found a photocopy of a second set of documents, contracts, ledgers, names, that connected the dots in a way that could not be hidden any longer. The donor's name was not simply a figure of charity, but the head of a vast network that stretched beyond the river and into distant offices, a web of shell companies that had quietly profited from the fear that real change would require real risk. The copy bore a line under a name Tari had learned to fear and then learned to trust anew. And in that moment, a quiet hush moved through her, an understanding that the interval's doorway would only stay open if the town walked through it together, not as beggars at a donor's door, but as co-owners of a future they could measure with school benches and unclogged pipes and a clinic that saw every patient as a person, not a balance on a screen. The turning point arrived not with a siren, but with a whispered apology. The donor's own voice, carried by a speaker at the back of the crowd, admitting aloud what Tari had suspected in the ledger's lines. "I knew. I saw. I chose to act in a way that protected us all but did not respect you enough to let you know the whole truth. It was not malice," he added, "but fear. The fear that truth would ruin what fragile peace a town could reach without living under the shadow of a ledger." A murmur rose, then a sharper note as another figure materialized from the crowd, a woman who had run the community center's volunteer program for years, her eyes bright with stubborn hope, who stepped forward with a folded sheet of paper and said, "If we are to heal, we must know what we are healing from. Reveal the chain that started the rent spikes and the evictions. Show us the map that leads," stepping out from behind the curtain of a private stage into the light of a shared theater. He signaled to the town's lawyer, who announced a plan that would mix accountability with opportunity. A public audit, a transparent ledger that would be updated monthly, a new rule that no one could profit from evictions again, and a provision that the foundation's grants would be matched by a People's Fund, controlled by neighborhood representatives rather than distant boardroom hands. The first tangible payoff came quickly, an injunction against any further forced moves, a freeze on rent increases tied to inflation, and a formal apology read aloud by the mayor with a microphone that carried beyond the square to the river's edge where the mango trees stood like old guardians. Short voices rose in chorus. "Thank you for listening. We want to stay. We want to work. We want our children to study." And Tari felt the air shift from resignation to resolve, as if someone had finally turned on a gentle lantern inside every home. Yet the cost of mercy pressed down still. The crowd's relief braided with the worry of whose memory would carry the stories when a new investor with a different appetite arrived, the fear that praise could slip into complacency, the worry that the town would rejoice in the short-term gains and forget the longer work of building institutions that outlived their makers. So the plan's skeleton, public apology, audit, fund matching, scholarships, clinic expansion, was joined by a spine of daily practice, community review meetings, monthly open hours at the clinic, and a rotating council of neighborhood representatives who would sit with the donor neighbor as co-guardians, not masters. In the midpoint, a second revelation jolted the SCE. A young clerk from the distant city's office, once believed to be a mere messenger, stood up and said, "I saw the way the contracts were drawn. I saw how the shell companies linked to the land trade, and I could not look away. I kept quiet because I saw the cure could not come without risk, but I will not stay silent now." She produced a USB drive and a second set of emails that tied the distance's greed to a local landowner who had been buying parcels under a community improvement guise. The crowd drew in, breath suspended, as Tari and Kai exchanged a glance that meant they would not simply accept a public pat on the back. They would press for a full reckoning that included the distant party and the price paid by families who had already suffered. The donor neighbor moved closer to Tari, hands open in a gesture of confession and partnership, and whispered, "If there is a price to pay for mercy, I will pay it in full, and then walk forward with you. Stay with me, and we will make a future where every child can imagine more than a ledger's bottom line." Tari answered with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "We stay not to vindicate you, but to ensure that justice lasts longer than the next vote." The town's first post-interval landmark arrived when the council announced a binding framework, the Mountain Gate Agreement, where the foundation would fund the present needs and lay the groundwork for a transparent, participatory ownership model that would be overseen by a board of neighbors, the teacher who knew every child's name, the nurse who counted minutes with patients, the market woman who read the rent signs like weather patterns, and the old vendor who told stories of storms and resilience. The donor neighbor would remain as a partner, but only if he listened more than he spoke, and if he did not forget the people's voices when his phone buzzed with a new investor's note. The stage was set for the next act, a public hearing where every fear would be named, every promise recorded, and the ledger's chain would finally be traced from the clinic's birth to the school's future. Tari stepped to the microphone with Kai by her side, and the crowd quieted by the sheer weight of what they had learned, that wealth can act as a bridge or a trap, and that true mercy is a practice of accountability and shared power, not a single gift given from a hidden wallet. By nightfall, the town breathed a cautious relief, the river sang back to them, and the donor neighbor pressed a gentle palm to Tari's shoulder and said, "I will not leave until I can hear your children's laughter as loudly as the market horns." While Tari looked toward the river's gleaming lights and whispered back, "We will measure tomorrow by the number of doors kept open, not by the number of promises kept secret. The two chances are still with us, healing and holding, and we will choose the former with our own two hands." The interval's door had indeed opened wider, but the thread yet to be severed, the hidden partner's ultimate motive and the distant city's stake, hung in the air like a new cloud. And Tari, with the dawn warming the roofs and the first danfo horn sounding again, knew the next chapter would demand a sharper courage and a deeper listening, and she would answer not as a victim of wealth but as a steward of a shared future, ready to walk through the doorway with every neighbor, for the story of Kijani Quarter would go on as long as there were people who refused to let fear be the final chapter.